Hello, welcome to the Thyroid Pharmacist Healing Conversations podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jen Pfleghaar. We're going to be talking about thriving through the perimenopause hormone roller coaster. We're going to be getting into some really innovative solutions. We're going to help you guys feel better through this time. I know I was just sharing with Dr. Jen that before I hit perimenopause. I thought I had things all figured out with Hashimoto's. And then perimenopause hit, and it was kind of like a bus that derailed me. And I had to really reinvent my wellness routine and get into just way different wellness habits that were still relevant to Hashimoto's, but also modified for perimenopause. And so, super excited to bring this episode to you. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about Dr. Jen. She's a double board certified physician in emergency and integrative medicine. She went to medical school at the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine and training at St. Vincent's Mercy Hospital, did her fellowship at the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. She co authored Eat, Sleep, Move, Breathe, a guide to living a healthier life, and serves on the board of the Invisible Disabilities Association. Her passion for healing isn't just professional, it's personal. So she is one of us. She does have Hashimoto's. And so she dove deep into the world of autoimmune conditions, hormone imbalances, and thyroid health. Now she's on a mission to guide others towards better health. And she also has a book on thriving in perimenopause, which I'm so excited that this is going to be available to women around the world so we can care for ourselves and we can get the doctor trusted advice on how to deal, how to thrive in this life stage. So welcome, Dr. Jen. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. Super excited.
So can we get to perimenopause for people that maybe haven't heard of it? What exactly is perimenopause? I know there's like a few different definitions out there. Some people will say it's like a year before you hit menopause. Other people will say it starts at birth, right? So what what's the truth out there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we know the definition of menopause is one whole year without a cycle. And this can take different times for different people. It could be kind of quick. They have irregular periods and then they're without a period, or it can drag on. So perimenopause is the time before menopause. So this could be anywhere from 2 years to 10 years. I have a patient right now where it's like going on 20 years. And what it is it's the decline of these hormones. It's the decline of progesterone and it's the decline of estradiol, but also estradiol has erratic roller coaster up and down spikes. And I like to think of perimenopause like like an oven. Okay, so think about, you have an oven at your house, you have an oven say at your friend's house, your parents' house. They all preheat differently at different times. You can't expect them all to preheat the same time. They're all different ovens. And that's kind of like perimenopause. We're all preheating at different times to get ready for menopause. And that can be confusing. You can, like you were saying, it kind of hits you like a bus, and that's it. You think you have your wellness routine down, your health down, and then you get to your early 30s now. I'm seeing some women in perimenopause, sometimes late 30s, and you feel a mess. You're getting these symptoms that come out of nowhere. You're gaining weight out of nowhere. You're having anxiety, palpitations. So many different symptoms can be, from this perimenopause journey. And this is when, if we know some tips and tricks, what to do, how our hormones are working, we can glide through this a lot more gently.
Yeah, I can say with my experience, I was in my late 30s and I had always been a greyhound. Like I was always described as somebody that could just eat a ton of food and then I would never gain weight. And people were like, I don't think you're eating, or, do you have an eating disorder? I'm like, have you seen how much I eat? I always had an amazing appetite and just, except for some of the times when I had my Hashimoto's diagnosis, my metabolism was amazing, right? And then all of a sudden with perimenopause, I'm not hungry anymore, but the weight's coming on. And I'm waking up in the middle of the night anxious. Where did that come from, right? I'm irritable. My periods are coming more frequently. And I think sometimes when we have a hormonal imbalances, doctors and well meaning people in our lives are like, well, you're just getting older. Of course, you're going to gain weight. Of course, you're going to be more tired, or it's inevitable that as you get older, your sleep just sucks, right?
Yeah, all the time. And it's really hard for me because perimenopause women, they are just gaslit at doctors' offices. And think about perimenopause. This is where I really believe women are being attacked. We're being attacked physically with these hormone changes. And mentally, when we're going to the doctor asking for help, they're saying, here's an antidepressant or here's oral birth control, which is not going to help our hormones. It's going to disrupt them, and we're spiritually attacked too. I really think we're vulnerable. Sometimes we feel alone because we don't know what's going on, and we don't want to share it on Facebook or Instagram that we're struggling. We want everything to look perfect, and it's holding it all together. Some women are working jobs, some are homeschooling, we have kids, we have all these responsibilities. So this is where the stress of all of that kind of comes at a head, and then comes at the cost of progesterone when we already have declining progesterone. And that's why we're seeing shortening periods. We're seeing estrogen dominance like symptoms because we're robbing from that progesterone. And we can do things to help with that. But we first have to recognize it. I think that's the biggest thing. We have to recognize that I'm entering this perimenopause state, the state before menopause. We all know menopause, we all know what that is. And we know that bioidentical hormones can be really helpful for cardioprotective, for our brain health, for our heart health, for our bone health. So we know all of this. But what about before? This is where there's a lot of struggling. And I've seen women just, it just brings them to tears sitting in my office. And I've also noticed a pattern in this perimenopause that this is when a lot of divorces happen. And it was interesting. I was talking to my husband about it. He was talking about a coworker that was going through a divorce, and I'm like, well, let me guess, was she in her like late 30s, early 40s? Because the husband said she had just went crazy. and I'm like, she was in perimenopause. And I'm like, this is why, like, I'm writing this book. This is why I'm so passionate about it, because I feel like they're, we're being like attacked in so many ways. And it's such a busy time for us. I mean, all that we're juggling, all the different hats we're wearing. So if our hormones are going a little crazy, or we're gaining weight out of nowhere, and that just makes us feel very stressed and out of control, well, we're going to kind of deflect that on our families or our spouse because we feel out of control of our bodies. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I think, the divorce rates are just such a big concern, and then mothers not enjoying motherhood. I know these days many women are having children not in their 20s, they're having children in their 30s, sometimes in their 40s. And when you're going through that perimenopause roller coaster, you don't have that same patience. You don't have that same bandwidth for your kids. And unfortunately, I've seen some of my girlfriends over the years where they love their kids, but they're just overwhelmed, or they struggle with their husbands. They get really easily frustrated. And a part of that is progesterone. Now, I think a lot of I remember going through pharmacy school and talking about hormones and hormone replacement therapy. And it's kind of like you hit menopause and then you do some estrogen. And if you still have a uterus, you do some progesterone. But nobody really talks about how progesterone is the first hormone that plummets, and it kind of like jumps off of a cliff in our mid 30s in many times. Can we talk through progesterone, what it does for us, and maybe some of the signs and symptoms on how that might show up for us emotionally and physically?
Yes, progesterone's so important. And the reason why in menopause they would give progesterone is to protect the uterus if you still had one. And then if you didn't have a uterus, oh, you didn't get progesterone. No, we all need progesterone. We have progesterone receptors for a reason. progesterone is protective breast and uterus. And progesterone also is very calming in our mind. So progesterone's broken down in our brain, and there's activation of GABA receptors. So GABA receptors are what is calming in the brain. Different supplements can help with GABA receptor activations. People take GABA sometimes. Benzodiazepines are working on the GABA receptors. So progesterone is very important. We need it. So in perimenopause, some symptoms that you might notice, and I noticed them personally a couple of years ago, that those 2 weeks before are the luteal phase, before you start your cycle. So you have the follicular phase where estrogen is dominant, starts on the first day of bleeding, and that's 2 weeks. You have ovulation. And then you have the last 2 weeks, which is the luteal phase. And this is where progesterone is going to shine and be more dominant compared to estrogen. And that is what we need. So, what can happen is if this progesterone is going down, plummeting, we have a progesterone deficit during the luteal phase. And this can be for many reasons. Stress can drive progesterone lower. Um, think about female athletes that are pushing themselves to the limits, throughout their whole menstrual cycle. They have irregular periods, right? They're not getting regular periods. So when we have stress, that can affect our hormones, specifically progesterone. Cortisol is right down the line in that hormone cascade from progesterone. So sometimes we can kind of deplete our progesterone if we're really producing a lot of cortisol and very stressed. So what you'll notice during that maybe week before you get your ready to get your cycle, a couple of things could happen. You could notice your cycle length shortening. So you're 28 days every month, but then you noticed you're like 25 and maybe 26, like they're shortening because you have that progesterone deficit. You also might notice you're a little bit more ragey or angry or irritable. And luteal phase is nice to be more emotional, and I cry sometimes more, and that's okay. That we should embrace that. That's beautiful. But being irritable, ragey, over emotional, where you're reacting to your kids or snapping at them, those are warning signs. And don't be hard on yourself. Just say, hey, I'm going to figure this out. Like, what can I do to optimize my progesterone during the luteal phase? Do I want to, try some chase tree berry? Do I want to, or am I older where I'm just going to go and do some bioidentical progesterone? So those are the choices you have to make. So I did chase tree berry for a little bit. And then when I hit 41 and a half, I think is when I started progesterone during my luteal phase. And now, like, you don't feel that. You don't feel that touchiness around your family. Other symptoms that you could have is a lot of anxiety. You could also have heavier cramping, more PMS symptoms like headache, like I said, the cramping, the bloating, heavier cycles, and heavier periods. So all of these things you might be like, wow, I just realized I always had a normal cycle. It was 28 days. It lasted 3 days. I had maybe a little cramping. And now all of a sudden you're calling off work because your cramps are so bad and your cycle is so heavy. So we have to, dig into why, because there's a lot of reasons. We also have a lot of exposure to xenoestrogens or endocrine disruptors. So we have, our world is getting more and more toxic. We have fragrance and everything. I mean, you go to the airport and they have these new things where you walk by them and they shoot out fragrance. And I'm like going like this, trying to get through. So we live in such a toxic world where we have all of these endocrine disruptors, which what an endocrine disruptor means is anything, any chemical that can either bind to that receptor of our hormones or interfere with the receptor's action, or interfere with how we get rid of them and how we break down our hormones. And it's a lot. So sometimes we can have this estrogen dominance because we're exposed to all of these things in our environment. So then you could work on detoxifying your estrogens while also promoting the progesterone. So it's really a balance that it's already out of whack. I mean, I am seeing women late 20s, early 30s, like with estrogen dominance, perimenopause symptoms. And it's like, wow, we really have to correct these things now so we can preserve your fertility and your mental health while they're going through all these changes. So it's very hard though, because I will say you will go to your doctor or maybe talk to friends. And a lot of the conventional wisdom that you will get, which is not wisdom, but it's what they say, is go on oral birth control pill. So when you're going on oral birth control pill, you're taking oral estrogens, which then have to get metabolized through the liver. And that on its own can cause toxic estrogens and DNA changes. It can affect your fertility, affect your gut health, which will further disrupt your hormones. So it's not the answer. And I have seen another thing that is kind of scary, because I've seen a lot of these women, they're put on birth control pill. So, say in their 40s for these perimenopausal symptoms, then they don't even know when they hit menopause. They're like, well, they come to me when they're 50. They're like, well, I've been on birth control for 10 years. So I haven't really got a cycle since then. I don't know if I'm in menopause or not. So we get them off the birth control, we check some lab work, follicle stimulating hormone, and we go from there. So really a lot of dangers in just covering up the symptoms, especially with you being a pharmacist. You know that unfortunately that is what we learn in medical school and then pharmacy school. You get a symptom, a diagnosis, and you treat it with a medication, but that is not what is going to be helpful during perimenopause.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to your point with progesterone and how it has effects on the GABA receptor, which is our chill and relax neurotransmitter. I know a lot of moms in perimenopause, they're drinking wine, right? Some of them are taking CBD. Some of them are, taking some benzos just to try to chill themselves out. I know I was popping GABA here, L-theanine, and trying to figure out like what is going on with me. And actually, it's like a progesterone deficiency, and you get on the progesterone, and all of a sudden, you don't need the CBD, the wine, the GABA, you don't need the benzos, you don't need the Ambien, you can sleep at night, and wow, it's just like the world in front of you transforms. Um, I don't know if some people are saying like perimenopause is having like it's trending right now, right? And has it always been this apparent? Is it because I'm in my 40s that I'm aware? I know in 2020 that's when it started for me, and there was this global pandemic, high stress time, right? And so you had alluded to that there are factors that could sort of make your experience with it worse, potentially bring it on a bit earlier. When we think of progesterone declining, you're really going to notice that if you've got too much estrogen on board, right? Because that gets out of balance for you, and then you can really start noticing the symptoms. What are some of these things in our environment, or perhaps in our day-to-day lives, that you think and what do you think, is perimenopause more common now, or is this just something that we're finally talking about?
I think the environment has made it worse, has really made the progesterone deficient, with regards to high estrogens. Even glyphosate can affect estrogen receptors. And I know where I was practicing before I moved to Tennessee in Ohio in the Midwest, I mean, glyphosate on everything in the rain, you can't get away from it. They're spraying it. So that's affecting gut health, affecting how estrogen works in the body, and all of the xenoestrogens, fragrance and everything. All our food is wrapped in plastic. There's so many issues from that. And I also think that with the pandemic in 2020, that there was a lot of stress and also the spike proteins. And I think a lot of those probably accelerated to the stress on our body, because we're getting rid of this thing that that probably shouldn't have existed, and now we're dealing with the consequences from that. Stress can absolutely accelerate the transition to menopause and really kind of put you into early menopause sometimes. So we are seeing that, where there's patients with acute stressful situations, or even stress on the body through stealth infections. Maybe you're living in a moldy home, and that's going to act as an endocrine disruptor, also because you're not able to detoxify estrogen like you should, because your liver is dealing with all these mycotoxins. To your point about drinking wine to go to sleep, if your liver sees wine, it is going to stop stop everything else, and it's going to get rid of that toxic alcohol and put breaking down your estrogens on the burner. Okay. So this is a problem with women, and especially in perimenopause. You're more stressed. Since the pandemic, we've drank more alcohol as the country in the United States. And if you're trying to just deal with your symptoms and cover them up, if sleep's a problem, if anxiety is a problem, yeah, you're going to use a depressant to kind of get rid of that feeling that you have. And that's the last thing you want to do in perimenopause, because then you're not going to be detoxifying your estrogens you're making easily or well. And then that's going to make the balance between estrogen and progesterone even worse. Things that deplete progesterone, we can talk about blood sugar balance. If our blood sugar is really out of whack, that's going to be stressful on the body. If we're having big spikes of blood sugar all the time, all day, that can affect your hormones also. Also, if we're stressed, that can affect our blood sugar. It kind of goes both ways. And I've seen it both ways with my female patients. So, a lot of times, a continuous glucose monitor can help with that. You want it to be nice and smooth, your blood sugar. You don't want these big spikes. That's like pounding on the doors when you have insulin released in your body trying to get glucose into the cells. If you just basically, it's like crying wolf every time, eventually those cells are just not going to listen and they get insulin resistant. And insulin resistance, that can be really hard in perimenopause, as we are declining in our estradiol, which helps with insulin sensitivity, or it's spiking up and down. We could be gaining this weight from this insulin resistance. So you're eating the same, but you're becoming more insulin resistant. And this is where really balancing those hormones, cortisol included, which is our stress hormone, can really be helpful in perimenopause. And we don't always think about that. I was reading a book last night in the bathtub, trying to relax, and it was really interesting talking about being busy versus being hurried, and how that is like for our soul, right? And he was saying how busy is okay. Like, I have 4 kids, like I'm going to be busy, and I do explain this to people. I'm like, well, we're busy, we have 4 kids, and we just moved, and I have a business, and my husband works. But are we hurried? Are you rushing through everything? Are you not even enjoying the time with your kids? You're just going through the motions. And that's stress, like feeling hurried all the time. Our soul is not feeling any rest, and we're not getting rest. So that can contribute. Sleep too, as our hormones are fluctuating, we can definitely have less restful sleep. And if we're not getting restful sleep and good deep sleep and quality sleep, then that is stressful for our body. And then the next day, if we are unrested, we're going to crave carbohydrates. We know that if we're not rested, we're going to make bad food choices. And then that just goes through a vicious cycle. So it can be really hard during perimenopause when you have all these moving parts, and then you're not getting enough progesterone. Sometimes just giving a nice luteal phase progesterone, if you're in the thick of things with perimenopause, can just be enough to smooth everything out. And I've noticed this with patients with other things going on, like Hashimoto's, like a gut dysbiosis, like chronic mold or chronic Lyme, that if we balance that progesterone, then they're just in a better state. Their body in general, it's less inflammatory, it's less stressed. That then we can work on those other things. So that can be really helpful also.
Yeah, sometimes having a prescription on board or a hormonal support makes things a lot easier. I know one of the things I noticed was my executive function was always very, very good, I guess, for lack of a better reason. I was always on top of things and to do lists and very motivated, very driven. When I had when the throes of Hashimoto's, of course, that changed. And then I got myself into remission, got everything optimized. And I'm like, okay, productive human again, right? And then with perimenopause, all of a sudden, I'm like, leaving a mess here, walking into rooms, and I'm like, okay, thyroid function is looking good. What else is going on? And getting on Vitex, Chase Tree, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm like normal again. I feel amazing again. And then you could put in the things in place that maybe were overwhelming because there are some of those lifestyle changes for a lot of women, myself included. It was a lot more protein and a lot more fiber than I was used to eating to really help to manage my weight and doing more weight bearing exercise versus just my walks and yoga and hiking that I was doing prior. And a lot of times, you kind of like might know what you need to do, but you might lack that motivation in perimenopause. And progesterone is so amazing for brain health. And so Vitex can also help support some of that dopamine and just get things balanced so your brain feels like you again, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say it's a good idea to test your levels. And when we're looking at progesterone, you want to check it on day 19 to 21. That's where it's going to be at its peak. So it would be a good idea if you're listening out there and you're like, well, I don't know even what my hormones are. Definitely a good idea to check. You can just check serum blood work. So that would be you just go to your doctor, you can get it through insurance. Um, Once I start having patients on topical hormones, I do switch to saliva testing, and that's through a functional lab company. Um, this is more for anyone listening out there in menopause. So, when we put on topical estriol and estradiol, you if you check serum, it's not going to reflect the tissue levels and you will be overdosed. I see this all the time in my office. The saliva levels are going to give the actual tissue level so you know what your body is actually getting and what it's doing. So that's what I track on topical hormones. Now, with progesterone, topical, I usually do topical progesterone for younger women. And then I've switched to the oral. um, there have been my mentor, she said that there's a little bit more breast protection in giving oral progesterone as we get older. And oral progesterone helps with sleep because we're getting conversion to allopregnanolone. And then that's giving the brain calmness. So you don't want to take oral progesterone in the morning because you will be sleepy. So progesterone is is great, but we still want to test and not guess. So you want to check that day 19 to 21 of cycle and see where you're at, see what your progesterone level is compared to your estradiol level. Maybe sometimes we'll just work on detoxing the estrogen. Sometimes I'll get patients where their progesterone level is actually okay, but their estradiol level is really, really high. So we just need to bring it back into balance and look at their symptoms and see if they're having estrogen dominance symptoms. Because if they are, even with an adequate progesterone, we need to make sure we're getting rid of the estrogens properly through our liver and through our gut.
One of the things that I noticed that was a really big game changer for a lot of my symptoms was liver support. And fiber also helps because it helps us to get rid of some of that excess estrogen. Do you have specific things you use to support liver?
Yeah, I love liver. So estrogen is going through phase one and phase two detoxification, and then goes out through the gut and through an enzyme called beta glucuronidase. If it's overactive, you can keep recycling those estrogens. So at that end, we want to have good gut health, and calcium D-glucarate can help with that. And that's where the fiber can also come in and help get the stool going through because we need to make sure we're pooping it all out. In phase one and phase two, that can be supportive with supplements like I3C and DIM. And you can actually get those components in broccoli sprouts. So, a lot of broccoli sprouts are really good for hormone health. Milk thistle is going to be good. You could use artichoke root, dandelion. You can also use castor oil packs, anything to support the liver. And then a big one is NAC or glutathione. So, those are really important for phase two. So, good liver support, especially because our livers are overburdened by all the toxins in our world. And, to go back, like, is perimenopause just being talked about more. Well, maybe it's just we're more symptomatic because 50 years ago, 100 years ago, we didn't have as much stuff, as many chemicals and pesticides and herbicides and glyphosate. And so it's a lot harder on our bodies and it's a lot harder on our hormones. So we have to be proactive. I take liver support every day and I will take it all the time. It's just that important. And then, of course, not trying to go against your liver, right? So having clean products in the house that you cook with, that you're putting on your body, and avoiding, glyphosate sprayed oats and grain and all of that. So really making sure that your input is good also. And of course, alcohol.
Yeah, it's been so interesting. I know when I first started working with clients with Hashimoto's, I had them with like multiple chemical sensitivities, and a lot of them just weren't really getting better with the recommendations. And sometimes the testing took a while. And it got to the point where I was working with them for months and they just weren't really getting better. They would try a vitamin and they were like, this made me feel worse, or I didn't feel anything. And that's when I came across liver support, and working with that for just 2 weeks helped to clear up so many people's symptoms. And back in the day, I thought it was like a one and done deal where maybe you need to repeat it like once a year, I don't know, once every few years. But then a lot of people were like, hey, I feel really good on this. What can I stay on it? And I was kind of like, I don't know about that. But then with myself and my own perimenopause journey, and I also had some mold exposure, I was like, 2 weeks isn't enough. Like, you need to be really actively supporting your liver detox pathways and really make over your personal care routine, because there's just so much that we can become more sensitive to. I know we mentioned alcohol. I know caffeine. I used to be able to sleep after chugging caffeine, and all of a sudden it's like 3:01, and if I have a cup of tea, then I can't sleep the whole night. And then also anything that could stimulate or support estrogen, so any kind of even adaptogens that have some estrogenic activity. These are all things that can be really, really impactful when you have perimenopause, where maybe you didn't really think they were relevant in your 20s or earlier 30s. It's just been very fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And we need to start thinking about the stuff in our 20s or 30s, like ladies out there, they need to be aware of it because that is when, the concern, like breast cancer, 1 in 3 women are diagnosed with breast cancer, and that prevention starts in your 20s, and your 30s and 40s. Yes, you can still make a difference and you can still support your body, but we should be thinking about this and telling these things to women in their 20s. And that's what's frustrating is, there's not enough prevention. Detection is not good enough. But yeah, like drinking alcohol, think of all these college students, they're drinking alcohol, eating pizza with glyphosate in it, on oral birth control. I mean, their hormones are trashed, and then their gut health gets trashed, and then they get an autoimmune disease, or it's so hard to watch, especially when I've been through that, right? I was put on oral birth control to regulate my period. I had a mold exposure in childhood. I drank beer in college. All of these things, you look back and you're like, oh, like if I only would have known or someone would have told me. So that's why it's really important to start thinking about these things. And with estrogen detox, you can actually get an estrogen metabolite test where you look at your urine metabolites and how you go down the pathways of estrogen detoxification. And that is the 2-methoxy pathway, which is a good pathway. That's how we want to detoxify our estrogens. And then there's 16 hydroxy pathway, which is it's okay. We don't really want to go down that road too much. But then there's a road we really don't want to go down, the 4-methoxy pathway. And that can create DNA damage. And that is scary. We don't want to go down that pathway too hard. But genetically, some of us do. So what do? Well, we want to, first of all, not do things that tie up our liver, like take pharmaceutical drugs we don't need or drink alcohol or, everything we were talking about. And then you also want to support that good pathway. So think about driving in a car and you're going to go down the good road instead of, the bad road. So we can gently steer our body that way. But it's really eye-opening if you do get one of those urine metabolite estrogen tests, because I got one and I really, not that I would drink a lot, but I really don't drink, like, it's a special occasion because I know that it's important for me and for my children, for me to be healthy and for me to metabolize my estrogens properly.
It can be life changing when you see something on paper. It's one thing to know that drinking isn't good for you, but sometimes when you see something on a lab test, that can be very confirming. Is it the Ditch test that you like to use for these metabolites, or is there another test that you utilize?
Yeah, you can use that one. So I utilize ZRTs, their estrogen, urine estrogen metabolites, because I use them for my saliva testing, because that's the women that I have on bioidentical hormones. I check their saliva also. But and you don't have to spend like thousands of dollars a year on this. It is an expensive test. It's a couple $100. You can use your HSA, but just get it if you just get it once, because then you could be like, oh, like I don't, I go down hard both pathways, which is what I do, and some people, their genetics, it's perfect. Like how, they go, about 80% is down to the good pathway, and then a couple percent down 16 hydroxy, and a couple, it's like, I'm like, your genetics are great. But those women can get breast cancer too. I've seen that also. And, oh my goodness, a patient that I have, I really think her root cause of her breast cancer at a younger age was stress. So, once again, ladies, if you are type A, join the recovering type A group with me.
Me too.
Oh, good. Yay. We should start a club. We really should. And you really, like I said, don't be hurried all the time. Just really slow down. I would 10 out of 10 recommend moving to Tennessee and getting a bunch of chickens. I'm just kidding. But I might have a little chicken problem, but taking care of chickens, it's very calming and relaxing, I will say. But so just find ways, even just unplugging and reading books with your children. Like if your kids, no matter what age, ask you to read a book with them, you sit down and you do it, because that forces you to slow down and just enjoy. And I know, like you, Dr. Isabel, like you wear a lot of different hats, and you could probably fill your schedule all day long with doing stuff for someone or for your business, but you can't. I've done it. It's not good. It's not making anyone happy.
It's a fast road to burnout for sure when you go through and you don't make time for yourself and you don't make time for the things that bring you joy and really fill your cup when you're just in that, I guess, high performance. And I think, we're told to be boss babes and have side hustles and all these things. And I don't think it's great for most people in the long term. Sure, for a few months here and there, maybe you need to get through a big project, you need to go through school, or write up a book, but you really do need that time for yourself. I'm glad you mentioned ZRT Lab. I really, really love them. They've got fantastic tests. I've used a lot of their adrenal tests, the saliva tests for people, because to your point, a lot of times people with Hashimoto's are going to have burnout and they're going to have that adrenal dysfunction, low cortisol. We talked a little bit about chronic stress and how that can dysregulate hormones, how trauma can do that. I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about the vagus nerve and how you support people in that kind of healing path.
Yes, that is such a great one. I'm glad you brought that up. So, vagal nerve stimulation is really important. That is the parasympathetic. So, we have the sympathetic fight or flight, running away from a tiger. That's great. And I'm I feel great that God gave us that ability. That is when you have superhuman strength and you pick up a car, you run real fast after your kid. Oh, I felt like this when we were stuck in like a possible tornado situation when we were camping and we were running to the storm shelter, and I was like, I felt, oh my goodness, I was wearing a continuous glucose monitor. My blood glucose, I think it went up to like 250. It was the highest it had ever been. I could have ate like 20 cookies and, those nasty crumble cookies. No, I'm just, no judgment, but those are just sugar. Don't, don't, don't do that. That is a fad I do not like. But anyway, so stress, whew, and blood sugar is terrible. So I wish then I would have had a vagal nerve stimulator to zap on me. So the vagal nerve, it's going to kind of put the brakes on things. So that is the balance. That's rest and digest. A lot of people with chronic constipation, they have vagal nerve issues. Maybe they've had trauma during childhood or even a car accident, or a lot of things can be triggering trauma wise, and our body keeps the score for that. So the vagal nerve, you can stimulate that by talking, humming, singing. Their vagal nerve runs right down your neck. So you can actually feel when you talk, like there's vibration going on right there. Things like grounding, things like meditation, prayer, that can all help reset the body. I really like using a vagal nerve stimulator. I've been consistently using it the last couple of months, and I really like it. I'll use it before sleep, and I put it on the right side because that's where the most vagal nerve fibers are going to be, and you can just put it there, and it's just 2 minutes and done. And I recommend that to my patients that are stressed or dealing with constipation. Do you have you tried a vagal nerve stimulator? Do you like it?
I think I got the Pulsetto and I used it a little bit. Is there one that you like? I have a lot of full disclosure, I have a lot of gadgets.
Hmm.
There's like a waiting list for when they'll get tried. And I haven't tried those before, but I have had some clients with really good results. Do you have one that you really like using?
I like the True Vega, and it's really small. I travel with it. The last few times I've flown, I put it in my carry-on because I I was like, well, if something happens, this would actually be a really good solution to trigger the vagal nerve. Um, the the gentleman that created the True Vega product, it's really interesting. In his book, he talks about how they used to stop asthma attacks by vagal nerve stimulation. So it's really cool because you think about it, it's going to instead of bronchoconstrict, which is an asthma, it's going to bronchodilate because it's that parasympathetic tone on there, similar to a racing heart. If we apply parasympathetic support, that is going to put the brakes on the heart rate. So there's a lot of cool books, like the polyvagal theory is really good. It's very dense. It will be a good book to read before bed just to get you off to sleep. I remember I would read it and I'm like, I can only read 10 minutes of this. It's making me so sleepy. And then the body keeps the score is great. So that ties into perimenopause, because if you're operating in a fight or flight in a sympathetic tone, that is going to push the cortisol, that is going to run your hormones ragged, and you're going to go through perimenopause earlier. You're going to have more trouble with it. So it can really be a factor, especially post pandemic. I think we all have a little bit of trauma, and trauma can really affect that sympathetic parasympathetic balance. It's been hard to watch, honestly, how much trauma people have over the past like 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, I agree with you with so many people going through such trauma, and I've seen people, I mean, just get really divided about their politics or that some of the choices they made, where I've seen people who disown their siblings or family members. And I'm like, we can agree to disagree and still appreciate the humanity in one another. Like, there's not a single person in this world where I agree with them on everything, right? And it's just been very devastating to see people doing that. And I feel like a lot of that is coming from unresolved trauma, some of that fear of survival. I'm going to have to try Truvaga now. Now you just gave me another gadget to try now that it's got positive reviews. 2 minutes a day, is that all you really need to use it for?
I use it twice a day, but one time a day is better than none, because some days I won't use it. And but honestly, like the biggest game changer for me has been giving up control. And just knowing like God is in control for me, because I think back, the politics, all of that. It's like what can we even do? Fighting on the internet with someone, or your siblings or family, like that's not going to help. And ultimately, like, we're not in control, so we can just surrender and live with peace, and not have that anxiety. And that goes back to trying to multitask and be boss lady and all of this, and we're having the world like tell us all these things, and but it's not serving us or our family. And I really, like, about a year ago, I wanted to focus on my family, my husband, and make sure everything is good at home first, and then make sure I have that down, and then go out and do the boss babe and do the other things. But if you find that those things, they're not even bringing you joy, they're bringing you anxiety, and you're bringing it home, that is just going to disrupt everything. And I think that there's a lot of pressure on women right now to kind of do everything, and the economy's hard. It seems like both parents have to work, and it's just a lot. So you really have to sit down with your family, come up with a game plan so your health isn't suffering, because I'm seeing it so much with women. They're just very stressed, very anxious, and not happy, and then coping with things like alcohol, or taking, being despondent on their phone, away from family, all that stuff. So we really just have to go back to what's important, and not what's important, like what TikTok or Instagram telling us important, but what we know is at the center, our family and God, and keeping that part really, really tight and running well. And then we can go out and do other things.
Yeah, I'm a big believer of like health starts in the home. And so you want to make sure that you have a good relationship with your family, that you have a good relationship with your God or a higher power that you believe in, and that you're taking care of yourself before you try to take over the world. I know it's challenging for women that are in that state where they have children and maybe aging parents, right? Because you feel stretched in so many different directions trying to care for your young children and your aging parents and trying to do the work thing. And I think it's a perfect recipe for going into that burnout stress response, and then you end up getting into early menopause and perimenopause. And I love that we talked about parasympathetic, because that can be a really healing state when we're constantly rushed and going from thing to thing. It's like we don't have that opportunity to get into that. My favorite is like Epsom salt baths.
Mm-hmm.
I know my husband for a while would be like, "How long can you stay in there?" I'm like, "As long as I need to."
I have it so hot because sometimes I'll be like, we have a huge tub, and I'm like, do you want to come in? My husband, he's like, it's so hot. I'm like, yeah, because then I sweat and I detox, and I'm in the Epsom salt detoxing with magnesium. It's like a 2 for 1, because we don't have our sauna set up here yet, and I think I need to clean it. It's really gross and sweaty. So, but yeah, Epsom salt baths, and I have a like red lights all throughout my home, like put in red bulbs, and I have one right above my tub. So it's like I have the mood set there, because you also want to, avoid blue light at night for your circadian rhythm, and so you release melatonin so you sleep well. So there's so many things, because I know I would work up on my computer with patient charts until midnight looking at that blue light. I mean, I have blue light blockers on, but it's still not good. So we all need to have our boundaries and make sure that we're putting our health first, because that is the most important thing, with perimenopause and taking care of your family. Like, you need to be healthy for them.
I have red light bulbs in my house too, so
My house probably looks really weird at night. I love it because one of the chicken heat lamps we have is red. So I'm like, oh, they're little biohacker chickens. They don't know it, but they are.
and then you can get soy-free eggs, and you know what kind of feed they're getting, so you know that your eggs are absolutely healthy. Um, we didn't get a chance to talk about cycle syncing. Can we get into that a little bit, and can you let us know what that is and how women in perimenopause can benefit from that?
Yes, absolutely. I love cycle syncing for ladies of all ages, for women. It's really cool to be in tune with your cycle. And we talked a little bit about what the cycle was earlier. So with cycle syncing, we use those hormones to our advantage and how they work in our body and what we should do from eating to working out, even when to take pictures, family pictures. So that follicular phase where that estrogen is dominant, this is where I tell women that they can do their fasting. So if they want to fast, it's the best time to do it. If they want to do low carb, it's the best time to do it. So they're going to do better at it. If you tell someone to start a fast or a new diet, like, oh, I want you to put on a therapeutic carnivore diet, start during the week before your cycle. No, that would be terrible because that is going to stress out the body more. Now, during the follicular phase, we are more, because of estrogen, insulin sensitive. Okay. So we could handle more carbs here if we wanted to. We're more insulin sensitive. But during the luteal phase, we're more unresistant to stress. So we do require a little bit more carbs there. We have higher metabolic rate because our body is getting ready to implant if an egg was fertilized. So we can have a little bit more carbs there, but we don't want to stress the body out and do any extreme fasting there. That is going to drive the cortisol up and then, at the cost of our progesterone. So that follicular phase, that first 2 weeks of the cycle, try to do, your intermittent fasting here, your longer fast. You could do low carb if you're going to try carnivore or a new diet or something that, you want to try to incorporate more protein in and you've never done it before. Well, do it then. Do the hard things then. So you're not going to fail at it. Also working out. So we know the luteal phase, the second half of the cycle where progesterone is more dominant, we are more prone as women to injuries. There's a really cool study that they did in professional soccer players in Europe, and they noticed more muscle injury, and other studies have showed more likely to get an ACL tear during that luteal phase. So I tell my women, yeah, and it's really interesting too. I had a patient that tore her ACL, and I'm like, where were you at in your cycle? And it was during a soccer game. So she wasn't trying to like not follow the rules of cycle syncing, but it was during her luteal phase and she tore her ACL. So we're more likely to injury. So what does that mean? I tell my women patients that this is where you want to do more mobility. You can do walking with an incline with a weighted vest. You can lift weights because you should lift weights every single, all the time. We should always be lifting weights in perimenopause because we need to preserve our muscle, which is a longevity organ, which helps with insulin sensitivity. So what we want to do is lift, but lift higher reps, lower weights. So the follicular phase, this is where you're going for your PRs. This is where your squat, you're adding on a bunch of weight, you're going to hit it hard, low reps, high weights. Because when we're adding on more weights and we're really pushing ourselves, we're more prone to injury, right? So that's when you want to do it. Go for your personal records. This is where you want to work on your VO2 max and do sprint workouts. So this is when I do sprints on the treadmill during my follicular phase. And once again, you feel better doing it. You feel really good. They've also looked at studies with performance, and women feel better and perform better during the follicular phase. So it's really interesting when you see women when they're entering perimenopause, they are doing the HIIT workouts all throughout their cycle every day too much. They're not losing weight. They're doing tons of cardio, and they're like, why is this happening? Because they're fighting against their body. They're causing extreme cortisol, stress on their body, extreme spikes. Their progesterone's tanking. They're actually losing muscle because their body is so stressed, and cortisol is going to eat up muscle. It's catabolic, we call it. So we need to balance that. And if you want to do HIIT workout sprints, just do it during your follicular phase, chill out during your luteal phase, lift weights throughout the whole cycle. And you're not going to look like a man if you lift weights. You can lift super heavy. Like I've been lifting super heavy for the last 3-4 years. I do not look like a man. I mean, now if you're taking steroids like testosterone, then you might look like a man, but you're not going to look like a man. Okay. So that's something that I really like to tell women. Also, just kind of fun like when you ovulate day like 14, 15, that is when you're glowing. That's when you want to schedule a podcast, get family pictures, all the things, because your testosterone is peaking there. And that is when you want to be intimate with your spouse and make more children. So that's beautiful how God made our cycle. So if we're syncing our cycle, syncing our activities, our thinking, all of that to our cycle, we're not going to be fighting against nature or our body. And we're going to see improvements in our weight, in our mood, all of that, because I talked about diet and exercise. And those are the two big things that sometimes during perimenopause we're doing the same exact thing, eating the same, working out, but you're gaining weight because before you were younger, your body was a little bit more resilient. As we age, we get less insulin sensitive. Our hormones are declining, our growth hormones declining, everything's declining. So to be anti-aging, we replenish the hormones when appropriately. And we also were smarter about how we operate. So then we can really age gracefully.
It's cycle syncing is so fascinating, and I've just discovered it a couple of years ago, and it's been really interesting because my husband, for example, he would be able to study every single day for 1 hour a day if he had to study for something for 300 hours. I would get it done, in 2 weeks. And but I'd have to do it at a very specific time. And recently I shared this meme that was just brilliant, and it's like when the extroverted you makes the plans, but the introverted you shows up. And a lot of times I think that's so relevant for many women where they just feel their most bubbly, extroverted when they are, ovulating. And then when they're menstruating, they just want to kind of go back, right? And a lot of the health advice, a lot of the business advice, whatever out there is very much tailored to men who essentially have the same hormones throughout each day. Where for us, this is so empowering because if you're right before your period, you don't feel like doing high intensity exercise, you might feel bad about yourself. And then you can kind of fall off the wagon. You're like, I missed a day or I missed a week. What's the point? And you're not seeing results. But when you're so empowered with knowing, like, actually, I'm going to do this in these 2 weeks. Then I'm going to do a hot photo shoot and spend time with my husband and do some things with my girlfriends. And then it's going to be time to maybe lift some weights, maybe do some yoga. And then I'm going to have just some time where I'm going to chill and I'm going to, be in my woman cave and not really do anything, and just understanding your cycle, where you are and what that means. Such a game changer for, I mean, just for women. I'm such a big proponent and such a big fan of this. I wish more people would know about this.
It's fun, and I'm I'm teaching my daughter, and then my sons pick up on it. It's so funny because I'll maybe just be a little bit more emotional, or I'll just be like crying at church, and I'm like, I'm late luteal phase, I'm late luteal phase. I notice too on Instagram, my Instagram stories, when I'm late luteal phase, I'm spicy, I'm a little spicy, like sometimes I'm just a little snarky, and I will maybe not have as good of a filter. And I joke about that because I'm like, oh, I'm late luteal phase. That's why I'm like going off on tangents about random things. But I think, and you could teach your son about it. Like I'm excited for like our boys to have, to have girlfriends and wives and like really be in tune with their cycle. And then they probably would have a lot less like arguments and, frustration. So it's really fun to embrace this. And like you said, not beat yourself up. Like when if I'm craving a bunch of popcorn or just want like more carbs, like or even more food during my luteal phase, it's okay. I'm not going to shame myself. And you're not going to gain 20 pounds in 2 weeks. What you do is you rein it in during your follicular phase. You do a fast, you do a 36-hour fast, maybe do keto for a couple days, or you're metabolically flexible, you can go back and forth. So yeah, don't beat yourself up over it, because that's going to stress you out and that's going to affect your progesterone, and then we're back at square one. So I think and please don't compare yourself to like Instagram influencers or don't compare yourself to anyone. No one is doing what you're doing, and you're doing a great job. So I think that's women are just, we just have a lot of external pressures nowadays that weren't there, that didn't used to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's exciting to be in this day and age because like you said, I'm excited for my son. He understands what a menstrual cycle is, even though he's only 7, right? My husband's super empowered, so he understands that sometimes Isabella might make a lot of plans and sometimes she might not want to uh, go out and see anybody. And he understands these things where I feel like my father's generation um, oblivious, right? And they don't realize that. And all of the recommendations out there are okay, you should do this. And they're for fasting or for work and productivity, whatever, they are for men, right? And
Mm,
so knowing this is empowering.
yeah.
One other exciting innovation in these day and age that I'm excited to watch and learn about is the use of peptides. Now, these have been transforming healthcare anywhere from children's health to gut health to autoimmune health to women's hormones. I would love to know how you're utilizing peptides for women.
Yeah, I've been using peptides for quite a while before, they're kind of like a buzzword now, which is great. I love that they're getting more attention, more people are utilizing them. And, there are a bunch that I used to use, and the FDA has them on this category, to be where you can't get them from compounding pharmacies. So I utilize compounding pharmacies where it's a regulated, they get checks from the FDA. It's a regulated compounding pharmacy. I know my compounding pharmacist, and that's where I get these different peptides for patients. There's also a lot of oral peptides, and there's certain brands that are actually really good and high quality. The oral peptide companies, supplement companies that I recommend to patients, I know the owners. I have their phone numbers. I talk with them. I know it's good quality. So you definitely want to make sure you're working with a provider that knows peptides, knows the peptide world, and that you're getting it from a good place. Especially with the injectables, a lot of the injectables, people are getting them from China now because they can't get them from their compounding pharmacies, and they could be not what they say they are. They could have LPS in it, like a polysaccharide, which could cause a lot of inflammation in the body and the gut. So you have to be careful because you're injecting this. So some of my favorite for perimenopause women, I do want to talk about GLP-1s. So GLP-1s are semaglutide, and then GLP-1s, GIPs is tirzepatide. And these work really well for women that are kind of stuck, that they are insulin resistant for whatever reason. It could be stress, it could be from bad dietary habits, and they've tried all the things. We've tried all the hacks. They lift weights, they've tried berberine, they've tried to reduce their stress, even though that's always something that they're working on, but sometimes it can just kind of move the needle. And working so many different ways, working on feeling satisfied, working on delayed emptying of the gastric muscle, but also working on like brain inflammation and generalized body inflammation. So sometimes it's more than just losing weight when we're prescribing these peptides and using them. So my patients, though, we do really low doses and short amount of times. If I have patients on it for longer than a few months, they're usually on a microdose, and it's usually for inflammation. The other thing about GLP-1s, you should not look like you're on Ozempic or Monjaro. You should not look like that. If you look like you lost a lot of weight or you're taking one of these, you're doing it the wrong way. You're working with someone that doesn't know what they're doing. It should be a gradual weight loss where you're maintaining muscle. So I have my patients, I'm like, okay, think it's time to go on this, or they ask to go on. I'm like, okay, you have to have, 120 grams of protein a day. You have to drink lots of water, take your creatine, lift your weights. Okay. They have to do all these things. And sometimes I pair it with an oral peptide called Pepti Strong, which helps maintain muscle when they're on a GLP-1. So sometimes that one is helpful too. You can also pair a GLP-1 with a growth hormone secretagogue. So there are peptides, ipamorelin, CJC 1295, semimorelin. Those are different growth hormone secretagogues. So you can inject them up to 3 times a day, but usually my patients just inject them before bedtime on an empty stomach, and that goes with your natural growth hormone releasing rhythm of your body. And then that can be helpful because they're going to the gym. They have this growth hormone secretagogue on board with the once weekly GLP-1, so they work synergistically. um, there's an oral peptide, 5 amino 1MQ, that works within the cell, that works with the cell's like energy house. That one also has a little bit of lipolysis and really good for energy. So sometimes that one's good to pair too. And then gut health and healing. So with thyroid Hashimoto's, weight gain is a problem. A lot of women in perimenopause, they are postpartum and they have Hashimoto's, or they have thyroid problems, or they have gut health. So the peptides that are great for gut health are oral peptides, and you can get them as supplements, and that's BPC 157. That's actually derived from our gastric juices. And then I really like KPV, which is a tripeptide, great for gut health with inflammation, also great for mold, anything with like mast cells and inflammation. And then I love lorazepatide. Lorazepatide I love for kids too. And lorazepatide is actually going through, I don't know where it's at in the clinical trials, but that will be a medication soon for celiac disease because it helps with tight junctions and zonulin. So those are three that I love peptides for calming down gut inflammation. And what can make gut health worse? Stress. So I know we keep going back to that, but that's because that is, it's so important. And I know, with your adrenal book, you go through that a lot too. But personally, we moved about 3 months ago, and it was a lot of stress on my body, and my gut health, it got a little off. So I doubled down on peptides, on eating, on sleep, vagal nerve stimulation. So this is these peptides, they're such great tools to be used in conjunction with the basics, with good sleep, with eating right, with meditation and prayer, with movement. And that's one thing, I have like an online peptide course where I first, because it's for providers or lay people, that I first go through all of those basic health principles, because I have seen that peptides will work better when you are at least paying attention to those things, right? Um, the downsides of peptides are that they are expensive. I mean, really not terribly expensive, but some of the injectable ones are expensive. So otherwise, like if I could put everyone on a couple peptides that see me, I would, because there are so many good ones. Another fun one I like to talk about for women and men is PT 141. And you mix that with a little oxytocin, and you could just do intranasal, so no injections. And intranasal, you have less nausea with the PT 141, and that's before intercourse with your spouse. So my husband and I will take it sometimes, like just like we'll joke about it, or sometimes I'll utilize it in the luteal phase, like when I'm like, I don't really want to be touched, like that's another thing, right? Like sometimes our hormones, our men are designed to want to have sex every day because that's how their hormones are. And ours is just that ovulation, that peak right there. But it's still good to be intimate. And the PT 141, it helps with that. So, and stress is actually a big downer for wanting to have intercourse with your spouse. So, but it's just a fun peptide because the PT 141 helps with arousal, and then the oxytocin helps with that comfort, that interplay. And it's the love hormone oxytocin, and that's what we produce with breastfeeding, and actually giving long hugs, you can produce your own oxytocin. So those are, yeah, I could talk about peptides all day. I love them, and they're really just another great tool in the toolbox for all things.
Yeah, those are can be really, really fascinating. I've used some intranasal oxytocin in the past, and that can be a really big game changer going into crowds or meeting people. For people with social anxiety, that can be a really big game changer. The lorazepam I had seen in the research many, many moons ago, as like 15 years ago. And so I was so excited when I realized it was available. So people can actually utilize this now, where for the longest time it was just kind of like a research thing that was maybe going to get FDA approved and maybe become a drug one day. And now this is available and it can be helpful for intestinal permeability, which is such a big, important factor to address when you have autoimmune disease. Do you have a store where people can get oral? You had alluded to reputable sources where they can get some of the oral peptides. The injectable ones, we want to make sure we get a prescription from a physician, or we're working with a qualified compounding pharmacy.
Yeah, on my website, Healthy by Dr. Jen, I have my favorite oral peptide brands there and some bioregulators too, which is a whole nother thing. But it's a really fun world for sure. The oxytocin, that's a good use of it for crowds. I didn't think about that for people with social anxiety. I know there's a lot of autism, like doctors that work a lot with autistic kids and pandas using oxytocin to just help calm inflammation of the brain. So yeah, really, really cool stuff. And this is stuff that, you're just walking into your regular doctor and they're just going to be like, what are you talking about? But there are so many of us using it, using these things and all these strategies, and there's research to back it, which is great.
It's just fascinating. I mean, I saw the research with children not meeting their milestones with crawling, specifically children with a condition known as Prader-Willi, which is expected, where they're not going to meet certain milestones. And they were using like intranasal oxytocin. And the kids that received that, they were crawling and meeting their milestones, having better developmental outcomes. And it's just incredible. I wish more people would know about peptides and would know about some of these innovative solutions. So I'm really, really grateful for you taking the time to spread the word about these. You have a book about perimenopause, how to thrive through perimenopause, and you include everything that we talked about here in greater detail, as well as some other strategies. Could you tell us more about your book?
Yeah, so the book's called The Perimenopause Reset. And if you go to drjenbook.com, you can purchase it. And there's a bunch of freebies, and it's great. It's 28 days through cycle syncing, through all the information and everything I've learned with my patients to get you through perimenopause. But it also is really helpful if you're older, if you're through perimenopause and in menopause and younger. There's still a lot of good tips in there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for creating this. I'm so, so excited to get my copy, and I cannot wait to read it from beginning to the end. I know I'll be having my highlighters and pens going through it. So super, super excited about that. Where can people find you and your work? Do you have a website and social media that you could share with us?
Yes, website is healthybydrjen.com. And I hang out mainly on Instagram, Integrative Dr. Mom, so Integrative DRMOM. And I also have a YouTube that I have videos and podcasts on there under Integrative Dr. Mom.
So we're going to wrap up soon, but I've got a couple of rapid fire questions for you to put you on the spot. Is there a wellness hack you refuse to participate in?
I would say I used to cold plunge all the time, but the past 6 months have been very stressful on my family, so I stopped doing it. And once we settle down in here a little bit more in Tennessee, I'm gonna start plunging again because I feel like my adrenals have reset. But that is something that like you have to listen to your body. You can't just like do a hack all the time just because everyone's doing it. I took a break and I'm still on a break until my body tells me I can do it again.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's been a popular answer on this podcast. And I think this can work really, really well if your thyroid is optimized, your adrenals are optimized. And Maybe you're going through a lot of hot flashes that's going to be game changing, but for a lot of times, people might find that a little bit of stress too stressful when they are in adrenal dysfunction, or if they're still hypothyroid, like that's going to worsen how they feel for sometimes hours, if not days, if they get extreme cold exposure. But yeah, that's been a very popular answer. What about if the supplement police came to your house and confiscated all of your supplements, but let you keep one? What would you keep?
Oh, that would be horrible, by the way.
Right?
Magnesium.
That's a really good one. That is like one of those foundational things that can be a really, really good game changer, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Jen, so much. It's been such a pleasure having you here. We love the opportunity of getting to learn from you. I know everybody listening has really benefited from this conversation. Really appreciate the work you're doing for women with Hashimoto's, women in perimenopause. On behalf of the community, I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you so much. It's been such a fun conversation. I appreciate you.
Thank you. And everybody listening, I hope this has been healing on your journey. Until next time.